Welcome back to the second video of how to create concept art for video games. My name is Ellie Cooper and I'm the Creative Director at Athena Productions, a concept art studio that is working on some of the very best video games, films and TV shows of today. And when we left off, we had created 3 black and white sketches from a brief, and they were all centered around the idea of that we were trying to create a level for a modern shooter game. And it was centered around the idea of a casino that is owned by a war dog and a weapons dealer. And we utilized shape language, architecture such as brutalist architecture, and storytelling details such as the statues that are holding up the building to enhance our story. And now we're going to take one of those black and white sketches and we're going to take it from black and white all the way into colour and finalize it up, ready to pass on to the 3D team or whoever's going to be utilising this afterwards. Let's get started. So in the end, we chose this sketch here. And there's a few different reasons why we went for this sketch over the others. So the main one is the architecture that you see here. We wanted to go with brutalist shapes, and we kind of kept that very sharp shapes that we have here. You know, all of the angles are very sharp throughout this building, almost, you know, reinforcing this weapon type of idea. You know, we don't want anything that is swooping or soft. You know, for example, if this part here was like this, it would just completely throw the language. You know, having soft circular shapes will feel kind, friendly, soft, things like that. And that's what we don't want with this. And we've also made sure to keep in the characters that we have here. You know, and we wanted to make sure that these guys were very, very obvious to the player or the viewer wherever they see them. You know, we don't want these statues to be lost. They're a really key part to our story and composition of what we're going here, you know. So we want to keep those in, and while yes, we have some that are dotted around the building here, we're playing with scale so that you have no doubt over which ones are the most important, and that would be these ones here. So we've made sure that, yes, we are repeating them, but that's a way for us to make sure that they're not just a one-off and that we kind of keep reinforcing this story. And as well as that, we really liked the idea of having the courtyard, you know, leading your eye wherever you are. So every time, you know, it leads the character like this. They're always being led to the entrance here. And we've changed up a bit of the courtyard as well. You can see here that this is different. Instead of going for that explosion of the character that's almost running through an explosion and all the shrapnel, we wanted to create something that was a little bit more abstract, a little bit sharper, a little bit more lethal. You know, because we have so many characters that are dotted around this scene, we don't want to repeat that too much. So by creating something that, you know, you feel like you could have just taken this from the architecture and just mushed it together and things like that, we can create an interesting shape here that stands out among all the other architecture. And this is the one we've gone for, and so we'll be going back into 3D, into Blender in this instance, and we're going to be starting to add colour and improve the details and take it towards final. So when we first get into 3D, we normally set up a HDRI. And a HDRI is a high dynamic range image, and it's a really great way for you to have realistic lighting from the very start across your whole environment. So HDRI is a 360 image that kind of wraps around your entire scene. And that's what we use. And we also will use as well some planes that have some photo textures on them, kind of like we're doing matte painting where we add on top you know, like we're doing here where we have these distant cliffs that are in the background and some of the water. And we'll just add those because, you know, we'd photo bash them anyway. So just by putting those in early, it can also be affected by the atmosphere that we have in and also match to the lighting a lot better and a lot quicker. And that's just one way that we can really quickly get in this realism. So when we create environments like this, we'll always try and use photo scanned models. And you can find photo scan models from places such as Megascan, Sketchfab, CG Trader, lots of other, you know, 3D marketplaces, you can find those. And what we'll do is we will add a mask on top of some of the cliffs here, so that on the z-axis we kind of have this grass, but then as it kind of slopes and it's more angular, it will rely more on the rock texture. And it's just another way for us to, add this difference as well into these models, so that it's not just all one color, and just kind of have this breakup as well. Using Draw, Scatter and Bag Up Eyes add-on here, we're just going to draw and scatter in some vegetation. Again, this all goes back to trying to break up some of the environment that's here. And we're doing it in a really quick way. If we had to place these by hand, we're at risk of, this taking far too long for something that shouldn't take that long. Considering all the other jobs that you need to do, you need to be able to think to yourself, is spending 2 hours on creating trees or hand placing trees really worth it, considering the amount of jobs you might have left to do on the concept? For example, you might be needing to change the material or re-render out your whole scene, or you might be having to design a new courtyard prop or courtyard statue or things like that. So you need to kind of decide what takes priority, and that's something that a really good concept artist is able to do. They're able to prioritize in their head how much something else matters in the grand scheme of the image. And for this, we're just using, like I said, some add-ons that will really quickly make sure that we can, pad out some of the environment, change up some of these rocks and break them up a bit so they're not just kind of just there. We want to show some vegetation in the area, and just add those in really quickly while not sacrificing the time that we have left. In terms of the colour scheme, we went with a mixture of obsidian, so that we kind of keep going back to this intimidating shadow kind of storyline that we were wanting to go for, and then gold. And the gold was to represent the casino, where gold is their currency. It is a great way to display their greed and their wealth, that they just are that rich that they're able to put gold trim all around their building. And it's important that we are careful with how much we use the gold. Too much and it will kind of unbalance the story of this building. We want to mix together these two materials, because our obsidian type of material here is almost matte black, but it's still got this shininess to it that can bounce a bit of the light off of it. But we don't want everything to be one flat material. So kind of having some of this gold in there that is a little bit more shiny, but very subtly so, will kind of add these differences to the building that makes it visually interesting to look at. And as well as our kind of main colours for this building, we also have the red of the carpet that leads into the entrance. And this again is, a red carpet. It's supposed to be elegant, prestigious, and wealth, and kind of feed into this, only the elite are able to go here. And of course, we also have the green of the curated gardens and courtyard. And all of these colours together, they all work together really nicely. And it's good to have, like I said, multiple different materials and different colours in there that all work in a cohesive whole. For example, if we had some of these statues that were bright pink, it wouldn't work at all. So we're being very, very conscious in designing which colours we're going to use in our scene. And you can see that throughout this concept, we've been thinking about, well, does this make sense? Does this feed back into the architecture? Does this look as though it doesn't suit this place? And that's what we're trying to do with every step that we are doing here, whether it's colour, details, architecture, everything is really carefully thought about and designed. And that's something that I think that a lot of people may forget, is it's not just a pretty image. You need to be kind of detached enough from the image that you're thinking about the player or the viewer or the story, or how these things add up to one big whole. So it's important that you don't kind of get lost in the process and have that moment where you might step back and say, well, does this work in the image? And be brutally honest with yourself and say, if it doesn't, then it needs to go. using emissive materials, we add light into some of the windows, and that's because we don't want this place to feel abandoned. If we had no lights at all, it would feel like it's an abandoned casino, hospital, whatever, and we don't want it to feel haunted or anything like that. We want it to feel like people are driving up to this place, they are using it, there are people inside. Maybe the mission is you have to infiltrate and you have to get to the weapons dealer, and that's what your mission is. So it's important that we make sure that it feels like it's not been abandoned. And you can use lights such as point lights as well to maybe light up a certain area, or perhaps you want to art direct the shadows a bit more so that you don't have complete darkness under a certain area, or you do want some in one area over another. So it's a great way to kind of art direct your image a bit more with the lighting and shadow. And it's also something that we use along the courtyard and driveway, because they would use lighting to guide the drivers up to the main, roundabout that we've got there. And that's something that if you looked at our references that we were using, you can see that at nighttime it's always super well lit. And that's what we want to put here, that it feels like a lot of money's been put into this place, and they've really intentionally, made this an incredible place to pull up to. As we're nearing the end of the 3D part of this image, we want to make sure that the mood and the tone and the lighting of this image fit the story that we're going for. So for example, if we had a bright sunny day and it looked really beautiful, full sun, this image would have a totally different feeling. But instead we're using an overcast sort of day, and it's very foggy, and we're using like these atmospheric effects to push that. And as well as that, we're also using colors that are colder, so we're using blues and more cold sort of green types, and yes, we have some yellow, amber type of colors in there for the windows, but using those sparingly is what's important. So the majority of this image is all very cold, but a little bit of this image has a bit of color, and that is to attract the player's eye and to create these points of interest for the character or the player or the viewer who might be wondering where they have to go to next. Using fog, we can push things further into the distance, but we can also use it to separate the background, midground, and foreground. And in this instance with this image, the background and the building itself are quite similar in color. So by just pushing the far background that bit more backwards so that it kind of isn't so close to the same value as the building, we can just make it look that much better. And this is something that you could do in Photoshop, that's absolutely fine, but if you have time, it's always better to do it in whatever 3D program you might use, just to create that definition. Otherwise you find you might have to more manually do it in Photoshop, which might take you longer, or it just might be more of a task to do. So if you spot it early on, it's always a good idea. You can always as well take a depth pass out of your chosen 3D program. That is always extremely useful to have as a mask, or to be able to select to push things further back and create that separation a bit more. And now we've reached the end of the Blender phase of our concept. And you can see that we've used Blender for a lot of this work. We've used it to establish the lighting, the colors, the architecture, and much of the details that we have in it. And if you can imagine trying to do all of this in 2D, it would take ages to do, and it's really hard to get that perspective and the lighting and things like that in 2D. And if a client was to say to you, move this light, can you change the lighting to something totally different? It might take you a long time to do that. So by using 3D, you can set up a really good foundation that is easy to change and also is more accurate, more realistic. And it's all about trying to find these ways that you can cut time down so that you can spend it on other things. And 3D is a fantastic tool that you can use for concept art, and it's something that we use every day in the studio. It's just something that you can't do without. Once we've got the image into Photoshop, we're going to add a level adjustment to it, just to bring up some of the shadows in the image. They're looking a little bit too dark, and it can just make the image feel as though the architecture is too close, or it might make it feel like it's a miniature. So we're just going to push that back. And like I said before, it's just this last 10% they say is often the hardest, but really all it is now is just pushing the details that we have and making those final adjustments that we might not like. And by using Photoshop, we can just, you know, very quickly change things that otherwise would take too long in 3D. A new feature in Photoshop is the neural filters, and it is experimental. It's like in beta at the moment, but if you go to photography and depth blur, you download the filter, and if you tick output depth map only and you have the output as new layer and hit OK, it can create a really good depth pass for your image. It's not always perfect, and you need to make sure that the layer that you're going off of, so the layer, whatever you have selected in your layers pass there, is the entire image, because otherwise it will just take the layer that you're on. So if you had a really tiny 1 pixel change, that's what it will go off of. So you want to make sure you have the whole image kind of applied or flattened so you can look at it, or create a depth map from that. And it is so useful, but like I said, it can be a bit funny, especially with trees, I found. So give it a go. It's a really useful feature, and especially if you haven't thought to get a pass or can't get a depth pass, it can be a really quick way to be able to select some of the depth, or create a mask or things like that. So I really recommend using that. So in this case, we use the depth pass to create a mask so that we can edit the far background a bit easier without going over top of the architecture. And what we're wanting to do is just create that depth and that difference between the architecture and the far background, because at the moment they're a little bit too close for comfort. So we just want to push it back and just use some sneaky artistic ways just to separate the two. We have now finished and finalized our concept art for the architecture of this casino, and this is now ready to pass along to the 3D modelers or whoever may come next after us. And as far as we're concerned, our concept art task is done, and we have achieved everything that the brief set out for us. We wanted to create a casino, but not just a casino that was owned by a war dog or a weapons dealer. And by using brutalist architecture and shape language, we were able to achieve a building that felt menacing and sharp and a bit dangerous. And using storytelling elements such as characters that are propping up the building, we're able to push that storytelling element that much more. And we also utilize things like the courtyard to direct the player or the eye up to the main entrance. And we utilize lighting and color just to push the storytelling and points of interest even further. And I really hope that these videos have been beneficial to you, to show you how a concept art studio that works on games from AAA to indie games works on a project or a task such as this. So I hope that you are able to take something away from this, but we've got a lot more content coming as well. So if you'd like to be the first to hear about that, consider giving us a like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Bye bye.